The courtroom on the third floor of the Tulsa County Courthouse held 80 people, and not one made a sound. Everett Lang stood at the defendant's table, 41 years old, wrists cuffed, listening to a prosecutor read the charge of grand theft against a man who had never once in 14 years taken so much as a spare part that wasn't his. Then, in the third row, a young woman rose. Sadie Lang, 20, looked straight at the judge. "Release my father, and I'll make you walk again." Laughter rolled through the gallery. Judge Isla Renner's eyes did not move from her. The gavel came down once. Order. 3 weeks before that morning, the house on the east side of town still smelled like coffee and burnt toast at 6:40, the way it always did when Sadie ran late. She was 20 now, scrubs half-buttoned, a nursing textbook wedged under one arm, moving through the small kitchen with the particular efficiency of someone who'd learned early that mornings didn't wait. "You're not eating," she said, setting a plate in front of Everett anyway. "Not hungry. You're never hungry with a hearing hanging over you." She poured coffee into 2 mugs, handed him one, and sat across from him at the same table she'd been eating at since she was 7 years old, since the night he'd carried her out of a shelter on Peoria Avenue, half frozen, refusing to let go of his collar. Gray wool, a button missing at the throat. She still remembered the collar better than she remembered most of that year. "You didn't do this," she said. "I know you didn't." "Doesn't always matter what's true, Sadie. Matters what they can make a jury believe. Then we make them believe something better." She said it simply, the way she said most things, and Everett looked at her for a long moment, something in his chest tightening that had nothing to do with the trial. She left for her clinical rotation without finishing her coffee, the way she always did, and Everett sat alone at the table a while longer, looking at the chipped rim of her mug, the pencil marks on the doorframe, where he'd measured her height every August since the year she turned 8. The last mark barely higher than the one before it, because she'd stopped growing taller a long time ago and started growing in other ways he was still learning to keep pace with. He thought, not for the first time that week, about the box in the storage unit behind the garage, and told himself, not for the first time, that there was still time to decide whether to open that door himself before someone else pried it open for him. The 3 weeks passed the way weeks before a hearing always did, slow until they weren't. On the morning it finally came, Sadie sat in the gallery while a prosecutor read the charge of grand theft against her father, and before her own mind caught up with her mouth, she was on her feet, saying the only thing that felt true enough to say out loud. The room laughed. The gavel came down once. Nobody in that courtroom, including Sadie, fully understood yet what she'd meant by it, least of all Everett, still cuffed at the defendant's table, staring at his daughter like she'd just set something on fire he couldn't put out. By 9 the next morning, Sadie was summoned to a small office off the main courtroom, not Everett, though she'd been the one who spoke without permission in open court. Judge Isla Renner sat behind her desk, robe already on, files stacked but unopened. "You understand that what you said yesterday could be read as contempt," Isla said, "and that you offered it on behalf of a man who hasn't consented to any of it." "I understand how it sounded." "Then explain it." Sadie didn't answer right away. She looked at the wheels of the chair Isla had rolled halfway around her desk to face her directly. "I'm not going to take it back," she said. "You can hold me in contempt. I'd rather that than let you think I didn't mean it." Isla studied her the way she studied witnesses who were lying badly, and then the way she studied witnesses who weren't lying at all, and found, uncomfortably, that she couldn't tell which one she was looking at. "You have no legal standing in your father's case," she said, "and you will not address this court again without counsel. Is that understood?" "Yes, Your Honor." In the hallway outside, a court clerk named Otis Hess, thin, 60s, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watched Sadie leave, then turned his attention to Everett waiting on the bench outside and did something strange. He stared at him a half-second too long, the way a man looks at a face he's seen in a photograph a long time ago and can't yet place. He said nothing that morning. He only frowned, faintly, like a man trying to solve an equation with half its numbers missing, and went back to his desk without a word. Otis found Everett at the vending machines 20 minutes later, coins already in hand, though he wasn't buying anything. "Lang," he said, testing the name in his mouth. Everett Lang, slower the second time, like a man reading a chart. "I used to work surgical support, Presbyterian, then St. Francis, going on 14 years now. Everett's hand stopped on the coffee button. "You don't remember me," Otis said. "No reason you would. I held retractors. You held the whole room." He walked away down the hall before Everett could answer, and Everett stood there with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, feeling something old and buried shift half an inch under his ribs. He didn't go back to work that afternoon. He sat in his truck in the courthouse lot for nearly an hour, engine off, hands on the wheel, running through names of people he hadn't let himself think about in over a decade, faces from a hallway that used to smell like antiseptic instead of motor oil. He had built an entire second life out of forgetting that hallway, brick by brick, year by year, and one man with reading glasses pushed up on his forehead had just knocked a single brick loose, and Everett could already feel the whole wall listening for what might come next. That evening, Sadie went looking through the storage unit behind the garage for a box of winter coats, and found, instead, a smaller box she'd never opened. Taped shut, pushed into the back corner behind a stack of car manuals. Inside, a framed diploma, a stethoscope gone stiff with disuse, and a business card, cracked along one edge, the ink faded but legible. Dr. Everett Lang, M.D. Spinal Surgery. A hospital seal in the corner. A hospital that no longer existed under that name. She sat on the concrete floor of the garage for a long time with the card in her hands, turning it over, looking for a joke, a mix-up, anything that would make it not what it plainly said. She found nothing. She didn't ask him that night. She spent the next several evenings instead, after clinicals, in the public library 2 blocks from the courthouse, searching medical board archives, old hospital newsletters on microfilm, a single photograph in a regional medical journal from 16 years back, showing a younger version of her father in scrubs, caption reading, "Dr. Everett Lang credited with pioneering minimally invasive spinal stabilization technique." She read it 4 times. She printed nothing, took no copies, told no one, and carried the knowledge home folded up small inside her. The way you carry something you're not ready to set down yet but aren't willing to lose either. The librarian, an older woman who'd seen Sadie in there most evenings that week, finally asked if she was working on a school project. Sadie said something close enough to true to not be a lie, and kept scrolling past a photograph of a hospital gala where her father stood at the edge of a group in a suit she'd never once seen hanging in any closet of their house, past a case study crediting a technique she couldn't pronounce to a man whose eyes, even 16 years younger and lit by a camera flash she'd never witnessed, looked exactly like the eyes that watched her leave for school every morning. She thought about the collar she'd grabbed onto that first night on Peoria Avenue, the one Everett still had, gray wool, missing a button, folded in a drawer he thought she didn't know about. She thought about all the versions of a person a single house could hold without ever saying their names out loud. 3 days after Sadie's summons before the judge, Otis found Everett in the courthouse parking garage, checking both directions like a man crossing a street he didn't trust. "I've been thinking about your case since the day I recognized you," he said. "It doesn't add up. A man with your record doesn't risk his hands over spare parts he could buy at cost. Someone wanted you out of that supply chain. And I've got a bad feeling about why. Give me some time. I used to be good at keeping quiet. I'm getting tired of it being for the wrong reasons. That man you remember isn't around anymore," Everett said. "Man doesn't stop being a surgeon because he stops holding a scalpel," Otis said, quiet, almost gentle. "He just stops using it. Whatever's happening to you, I don't think it's about spare parts at all." Across town, in the small office behind her courtroom, Isla Renner sat with a manila folder she'd requested through channels that weren't quite official, favors called in from a records clerk she trusted with things she wouldn't put in writing. Verification of prior credentials. Everett Lang. The name matched a medical board record from 14 years back. Board certified, spinal surgery, case outcomes in the top 1% of his specialty nationally. And beneath that, a single line she read 4 times. Voluntary surrender of privileges. Personal reasons undisclosed. No malpractice finding. No disciplinary action. Just a man who had, by every indication in the file, walked away from the top of his field and never come back, and a daughter who had apparently found this out on her own, and decided it was worth standing up in open court to say out loud. She closed the folder and sat very still, listening to her own breathing, and for the first time in 3 years, she let herself wonder, just barely, whether the young woman laughed out of her courtroom had been telling the truth after all. Garland Pruitt's office overlooked the river, and he liked to keep it that way. A reminder that from high enough up, everything below looked orderly. He was 63, silver-haired, chairman of the Meridian Regional Hospital Board and one of 3 men in Tulsa County who could get a judge appointed or unappointed with a phone call nobody would ever trace back to him. Across from him sat the assistant district attorney handling the Lang case, a young man named Coleman who took notes he didn't need to take. "The theft charge stands as filed," Pruitt said, turning a heavy pen over in his fingers. "I'd like it to stay exactly where it is. Simple, clean. A man who took equipment he had access to and got caught. His daughter made a scene in open court. It's already drawing attention." "Attention fades," Pruitt said pleasantly, which was precisely what made it a threat. "Convictions don't once they're entered." He set the pen down and folded his hands. "You've been with this office 3 years, Coleman. You'll be with it a good while longer if you remember whose calendar keeps the county courts running smoothly. Mine has run this county's business for 20 years, without a single headline attached to it. I'd like to keep it that way through one theft case." Coleman said nothing, only nodded, and closed his notebook without having written a word, which was, in its own way, exactly the kind of note Pruitt preferred. That afternoon, Isla summoned Sadie back to her chambers, closer to the desk this time, closer to her than strictly necessary. "I want to know where this came from," she said. "Not what it sounded like, where you got it." "I found it," Sadie said, "in a box he never opened in front of me. I didn't ask him. I looked it up myself, the medical board records, an old journal article. I know who my father used to be. I know because I found it, not because he told me." "You realize you may have made his case harder. A judge and a jury don't like surprises they can't verify." "I realize I couldn't sit there and listen to them call him a thief without saying what I actually know," Sadie said. "I'm not asking you to believe me because I'm his daughter. I'm asking you to check. You have more power to check than I do. You could have gone to his lawyer with this, filed it properly, through counsel, where it might have actually helped him instead of drawing the whole gallery's attention." "His lawyer's a public defender carrying 60 other cases," Sadie said. "He was going to plead it out by Friday, because that's what tired, overworked people do when nobody hands them a reason not to. I wasn't trying to win the case in that courtroom, Judge Renner. I was trying to buy him time. That's all I have, most days. Time and the fact that I've never once been wrong about him." Isla didn't answer right away. Something in the girl's steadiness reminded her uncomfortably of her own younger self, before the accident, before she'd learned to keep everything behind a bench and a robe. "Don't speak in my courtroom again without counsel," she said finally. "But I'll check." That evening, Otis Hess found an envelope taped inside his locker at the courthouse. No note, just a printed photograph of his granddaughter walking home from school, time-stamped 2 days prior. He didn't need it explained. He sat on the locker room bench a long time before his hands stopped shaking enough to drive. He didn't tell his wife why he was late that night, only that traffic on Riverside had been bad, and she believed him because she had no reason not to, and he lay awake afterward thinking about the 2 things he could do next: hand the photograph to the sheriff's office and let this become someone else's problem, or keep quiet and let a man he'd once admired more than almost anyone in that hospital spend the rest of his life paying for a crime he hadn't committed. By morning he still hadn't decided, but he had, without quite realizing it, already started deciding, the way people often do, by simply refusing to throw the photograph away. The county records office kept its accident files in a basement archive that smelled like mildew and cold concrete, and it was there, on a gray Tuesday, that Isla Renner went looking for her own file for the first time in 3 years, the way people avoid mirrors after a bad diagnosis until they finally can't anymore. Case number 4419, single vehicle collision, Highway 169, northbound. She read her own statement, typed by someone else, because she hadn't been able to hold a pen for 6 weeks after. Buried in an attachment she didn't remember seeing was a supply manifest for a delivery truck registered to a logistics company that, 3 ownership transfers later, traced back to Meridian Regional, the hospital system Garland Pruitt chaired. She read the routing number twice, mouth dry. Sadie had started her clinical rotation that week in the courthouse's small medical office, a placement Otis had quietly arranged. She was restocking a supply cart in the hallway when Isla rolled past. Slower than usual, a folder in her lap, eyes somewhere far away. "You're Everett's daughter," Isla said. It wasn't a question. "Sadie." She straightened. "I didn't mean to be in your way. You're not." Isla studied her, cataloging without meaning to. "How long have you known him?" "Since I was 7. He found me outside a shelter on Peoria. I was living rough about 4 months before that." Sadie said it plainly. "The way you say something you stopped being ashamed of a long time ago. He never made me talk about before, if I didn't want to. He just kept showing up, every day, until showing up stopped feeling like something that could end." Isla looked at her own hands in her lap, at the wheels of the chair she'd stopped noticing years ago, and suddenly noticed again. "That's a rare thing," she said. "Someone who just keeps showing up." "Can I ask you something?" Sadie said, and when Isla nodded, "Does it bother you, people staring at the chair before they see anything else about you?" Isla considered the question longer than most people bothered to ask it honestly. "It used to," she said. "For a while I thought the staring would stop once I got good enough at pretending it wasn't there. It doesn't work that way. Eventually you just decide which stares are worth your energy and which aren't." She looked at Sadie a moment. "You don't stare at it at all, I noticed." "I grew up around people who needed things fixed that couldn't always be fixed," Sadie said. "You learn pretty fast that staring doesn't help anybody get through the day." She hesitated, then added, quieter, "My father used to fix things nobody thought could be fixed. Before. I only just found that out myself, so I don't really know what to do with it yet." Isla didn't press her further, though the sentence sat with her the rest of the afternoon, turning over slowly, like a stone she kept picking back up. Everett was still being held pending trial when Isla, breaking her own rule against private contact with a party to an active case, arranged an off-record visit through Otis, ostensibly to clarify a scheduling matter. She found Everett on the other side of a scratched plexiglass divider, still in the orange of county holding, and found she had less to say than she'd planned. "Your daughter put herself out on a limb for you," she said. "She does that." Everett almost smiled, tired. 13 years, and she's never once asked my permission before doing the right thing. "Is what she said true?" He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't tell her any of it," he said. "Not the diploma, not the surgeries, not why I stopped. She found it herself and decided it was worth more to say out loud than to keep safe. I'm not angry with her. I'm terrified for her." "Why?" "Because the people who framed me for theft aren't going to like a 20-year-old digging where she's not supposed to dig." 2 days later, without warning, Everett's trial date was moved up 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Buried in a docket change nobody flagged until it was already done. Sadie found out from a form notice. She stood in the kitchen holding it, and for the first time all week, felt something closer to fear than resolve. Otis spent 2 nights going through Isla's accident file at his own kitchen table after hours. The habits of a man who'd spent a career double-checking other people's work. He found a discharge summary with a page number skipped in the sequence, 7 missing between 11 and 13. The kind of gap a careful person leaves when they remove something and forget to renumber behind it. He brought it to Isla the next morning. "Page 12 is gone," he said. "Not lost. Removed." Isla went very still. "I've read that file 100 times." You read what was left of it. That afternoon, Garland Pruitt requested an informal meeting with Sadie at a diner off Riverside Drive, the kind of place chosen because it looked like nothing important ever happened there. He ordered coffee he didn't touch. "Your father's a sympathetic man," he said. "Hardworking, wrongly accused by all appearances to a jury that likes an underdog. I'd hate to see that sympathy get complicated by a daughter making wild claims about a judge's medical history that have nothing to do with the case at hand." "Is that a threat, Mr. Pruitt?" "It's arithmetic," Pruitt said, and left without touching his coffee. Sadie sat alone at the booth for several minutes after he'd gone, hands wrapped around a mug that had gone cold, replaying the conversation for anything she might have given away. She hadn't mentioned Otis, she hadn't mentioned the manifest, or the missing page, or anything Pruitt shouldn't already have known, unless someone inside the courthouse had been watching far more closely than a records clerk quietly checking old logs after hours. She left the diner more frightened than she let herself look, and called Otis from the parking lot to warn him, though by then, she would learn later, The warning had already come too late. Isla granted Otis authorization to share her full medical file with Everett, through the visitation room, off the record, framing it, on paper, as an unofficial second opinion requested through counsel. It was the first thing she had ever asked of him, instead of a court asking something of him, and both of them understood the difference, even through plexiglass. "You don't have to do this," Everett told her, holding the folder against the glass like it weighed more than paper should. "I'm not doing it for you," Isla said. "I'm doing it because for 3 years I told myself there was nothing left to look at. I'd rather know I was wrong than keep being comfortable in a version of my life someone else edited for me." That night, Otis stayed past midnight in the record's basement, running a flashlight along delivery logs nobody had requested in years. He found the manifest for the night of Isla's accident, cross-referenced against intake logs from the same week at the hospital supply depot Everett had allegedly robbed. The dates matched, not close, exact, down to the hour. Otis came to the courthouse visitation room the next evening, phone in hand, voice unsteady. "I need you to look at this before I lose my nerve," he told Everett through the glass. "The night Judge Renner had her accident, the truck that ran her off 169 belonged to Meridian's supply chain. Same night, same shift. You were logged on a delivery route past that exact stretch of highway. You were the only person in that corridor at that hour." Everett sat back slowly. "I remember that night," he said. "I remember a truck pulling out of the shoulder too fast, no hazards on. I filed an incident note the next morning. 3 weeks later I was arrested for theft I never committed." "That's not coincidence," Otis said. "That's cleanup." Isla, told the same an hour later, said nothing for a long moment, then wheeled to her window and pressed her palm flat against the glass. 3 years, she said. "I told myself it was just bad road and bad luck." "You didn't do anything wrong," Otis said. "Someone made sure you'd never find out otherwise." She was quiet a long moment. "I need to see him," she said. "Not through a form. Not through you. I need to hear it from the man who was actually there." She went to the visitation room herself that evening. No robe, no bench, nothing official between them but the glass. "If this is true," she said, "I need to know what's actually possible for me. Not hope, not a headline. The truth, from someone who knows how to read a spine instead of a folder, someone's already gone through with scissors." "I can't promise you'll walk," Everett said. "I never say that to anyone, and I won't start with you. But I can promise I'll tell you exactly what I find, and I will not let anyone else's convenience decide what you're told about your own body ever again." Isla looked at him through the scratched glass for a long moment, and something in her face, guarded for 3 years the way she guarded everything, loosened just slightly. "Why does that matter so much to you? My chart, my spine. You have your own case to fight, because 14 years ago I stood in a room and let other people decide what a patient's family got told, and got it wrong," Everett said. "I've had 14 years to think about what I'd do differently if anyone ever gave me the chance again. I didn't expect the chance to come from a courtroom. I didn't expect it to come from you." It was the first time either of them said something true without armor around it, and both of them felt the room shift half a degree, glass and all. Garland Pruitt learned about Otis's photographs by Thursday morning, through a source he'd cultivated inside the records office, for exactly this purpose. By Thursday afternoon, Otis received a call at his desk from an unlisted number reminding him, politely, that clerks who leaked sealed materials tended not to keep their pensions, or their benefits, or, the voice implied without saying so, their granddaughter's sense of safety walking home from school. That same afternoon, a man in a gray sedan sat outside the courthouse's medical office for 40 minutes, watching the door Sadie walked in and out of. Isla convened an emergency hearing for that Friday, against the advice of 2 colleagues who warned her, gently but firmly, that she was putting her own credibility on the docket, that recusing herself before formally deciding anything might look, to the wrong eyes, like a woman with something to hide rather than something to prove. "My credibility isn't the point," she told them, wheeling past their concern without slowing. "A man is sitting in county holding because someone decided his silence was cheaper than my truth, and I have spent 3 years being the last person in this county to figure that out." Pruitt's people moved faster than she expected. Sadie's clinical placement was suspended that Thursday evening, a single sentence citing a paperwork irregularity that had never existed a day before, signed by an administrator she'd never met. She showed the email to Everett through the glass the next morning, and something in his face went quiet in a way she'd never seen. Quiet like a held breath before a decision, not defeat but the stillness just before a door gets kicked open. "They think this scares us," he said. "Does it?" "No," Everett said. "It just means I stop pretending to be a man with nothing left to lose, and start being the man I actually was." He asked Otis to place one call for him that morning, to a hospital administrator he used to know by first name, someone who'd cried at his going-away lunch 14 years earlier, and asked her to confirm, in writing and on the record, exactly who Dr. Everett Lang used to be. The hearing room was fuller than any Sadie had seen since the morning her father was charged, word having traveled the way it does in a county small enough for everyone to know someone who knew someone. Reporters lined the back wall, and somewhere in the third row sat the hospital administrator Everett had reached out to through Otis, a single manila envelope in her lap that would confirm, if it came to it, exactly who he used to be. Otis took the stand first, hands folded tightly enough to whiten his knuckles, and read the timeline he'd built from manifest to intake log to incident note, date by date, until the pattern was impossible to argue with. He did not look at Pruitt once while he spoke, though everyone in the gallery understood exactly who he was afraid to look at. Sadie testified next, called by Everett's newly retained counsel, a young public interest attorney who'd taken the case for nothing the week the story started drawing attention. She kept her answers short, factual, the way she'd rehearsed with him twice the night before. Yes, she had found the card herself. No, her father had never once told her what he used to be. Yes, she had gone looking anyway, because something about the way he flinched at hospitals, the way he never once complained about a headache, without also mentioning he didn't believe in doctors, had never quite added up to a man who'd simply always fixed cars. "I didn't stand up that day because I had proof," she told the room, voice steady, even as her hands weren't. "I stood up because I know my father, and I was tired of watching people decide who he was without ever once asking him." Then Garland Pruitt was called, and for the first time in the proceedings, his composure showed a hairline crack, a delay before each answer, a hand adjusting his tie once too often. He answered in careful half-sentences, deflecting toward subordinates who weren't there to defend themselves, until the prosecutor stopped asking questions and simply let the silence do the work. Somewhere near the middle of it, his eyes found Sadie's across the gallery, and for one unguarded second, the man who'd spent a lifetime arranging rooms to look orderly from above understood plainly that this room no longer belonged to him. Isla, seated at the bench she had occupied for 3 years without once mentioning her own name inside it, addressed the room directly. "I'm recusing myself from further proceedings in this matter," she said, "because the evidence presented today concerns the same incident that resulted in my own injury 3 years ago. I will not preside over a case in which I may reasonably be considered a victim. I am requesting, in the strongest terms available to me, that Everett Lang be released on his own recognizance pending review." The gavel, when it came down, sounded different than it had the day Sadie stood up and the whole room laughed. Nobody laughed now. Garland Pruitt did not wait for the appointed judge to finish reviewing the case. That same night, a records clerk loyal to him attempted to access and permanently delete the original discharge file that had once contained the missing page 12, the only surviving copy of the unaltered document proving negligence on the night of Isla's accident. What he didn't know was that Otis, days earlier, quietly frightened but unwilling to stop, had already made a full backup and stored it off-site, with a retired colleague he trusted more than anyone still working inside the building. The deletion attempt itself became evidence, time-stamped at 11:40 that night, matching almost exactly the hour Pruitt had learned of Isla's recusal, a paper trail of panic no lawyer could explain away as routine housekeeping. Otis handed the backup to investigators himself, refusing to let it out of his hands until it was formally logged, and when asked why he'd risked so much for a family he barely knew, he said only that he'd spent 12 years holding retractors for a man who never once let a patient down, and it seemed a poor time to start letting people down himself. Sunday morning, the newly appointed judge reviewed the full record in under 2 hours and issued the ruling from chambers. Everett Lang's charges dismissed with prejudice, his record ordered expunged, his back pay from the months of his suspension quietly restored by court order. Garland Pruitt was taken into custody that afternoon on charges of obstruction of justice and evidence tampering, led out of his Riverside office in handcuffs past the same window he'd once used to remind himself how orderly everything looked from above. Cameras from 2 local stations catching the walk to the car. Isla called Everett before the story broke publicly, her voice careful in a way it only got when something mattered more than she wanted to admit. "I want the evaluation," she said, "not because of anything your daughter said in that courtroom the first day, because I've watched the 2 of you for 6 weeks, and I trust you. That's the only reason I need." That evening, in the small house on the east side of town, Everett stood in the doorway a long moment before he could make himself walk through it, still adjusting to being a free man in his own kitchen. Sadie was already there, plates set, coffee on, 20 years old and steady in a way she hadn't let herself be all week. "You could have told me it might backfire," she said. "The theft charge could have stuck. You could have stayed in there for years, and it would have been because of what I said." "I know. Are you angry?" "No," Everett said. "I was terrified. I'm still catching up to not being terrified anymore." He sat across from her at the table, the same table, 13 years of mornings folded into it. "You bet everything on believing me before you even asked me if it was true. I don't think I've ever been trusted like that in my life, Sadie. Not even by myself. You would have done the same for me." "I would have," he said. "I did once." Different street, different year. She reached across the table and put her hand over his, and neither of them said anything else for a while, and it was enough. Later, once the dishes were done, and the porch light had been on and off twice for no reason either of them could name, Sadie asked the question she'd been carrying since the storage unit. "Are you going to go back? Really go back, I mean, not just consult on one case?" Everett turned the question over before answering, the way he turned over most things that mattered. "I don't know yet," he said. "I know I'm not going to hide it anymore. That much I'm sure of. Whether that means a scalpel again, or just being honest about the years I spent holding one, I haven't decided." He looked at her. "What I do know is that the man who raised you was never a lie, Sadie. He was just incomplete. You didn't uncover a stranger in that storage unit. You uncovered the rest of me." "I know that now," she said. "I think some part of me always did." 4 months later, the surgical suite at St. Francis was quieter than Everett remembered operating rooms ever being, though he wasn't the one holding the instruments that day, standing instead behind the observation glass, in a role he hadn't formally occupied in over a decade, his reinstatement finalized the week before by a hospital board no longer under Pruitt's shadow. He stood at the window with Sadie beside him, both of them in scrubs for different reasons, Sadie's clinical placement having been restored the same week the courthouse medical office reopened under new leadership, watching a team he'd vouched for and consulted with for weeks complete the final closure on Isla Renner's spine, his own notes annotated in the margins of the surgical plan, his handwriting steadier than he'd expected after so many years away from it. She woke slower than either of them expected, and the physical therapy that followed was neither fast nor kind. 6 weeks of small failures before real progress arrived, a toe that moved on command, then a knee, then, on a Tuesday in late autumn, both hands gripping parallel bars while a therapist counted softly beside her. 1, 2, breathe, 1 more. There were mornings she refused to try again, refused to let anyone in the room see how much it cost her, and it was Sadie, not Everett, who learned to sit with her through those mornings, saying nothing useful, just staying. The way her father had taught her staying could be its own kind of medicine. Isla took 4 steps that day. Not far, not without help, but 4 steps, unaided by anything but her own legs and the bars beneath her palms, and when she looked up at the end of them, chest heaving, Everett was standing at the far end of the room, not moving, not speaking, just watching with the particular stillness of a man who had learned a long time ago not to trust himself with hope out loud. Sadie, beside him, felt him exhale like it was the first full breath he'd taken since the morning. She stood up in a courtroom and made a promise neither of them knew yet how to keep. Afterward, in the quiet hallway outside the therapy room, sunlight coming low and gold through the west windows, Isla sat in her chair, tired in the good way, and Everett crouched down beside her without a word. Neither of them was a judge or a defendant anymore. Neither needed to be anything but tired and present. You never once promised me this would work, she said. I still won't, Everett said. It's not finished. It might never fully be, and I'd rather you know that than let you build something on a promise I can't keep. I know that too, Isla said. I think that's actually why I trust you. Everyone else in my life has spent 3 years promising me things they had no way of guaranteeing. You're the first person who just told me the truth and stayed anyway. She reached over, slowly, and set her hand over his on the arm of the chair, not asking permission, not explaining herself, just doing it the way a person does something they've been circling for a long time, and finally stops circling. He didn't pull away. He turned his hand over beneath hers, palm up, and let it stay there. Down the hallway, Sadie stood at the corner, out of sight, having come back to say the therapist wanted one more round before lunch, and stopped when she saw them, and decided the message could wait. She had spent 13 years watching her father carry everyone else's weight and set down none of his own. Watching him let someone hold a little of it back, even for a moment, felt like watching a door she hadn't known was locked finally swing open on its own. Neither Everett nor Isla said anything else. Outside the window, the last light of the afternoon moved slowly across the parking lot, and for the first time in 3 years, Isla Renner was not thinking about the accident, or the courtroom, or anything at all except the weight of a hand that had finally, entirely, stopped being careful.